The sun had barely begun to set, casting a soft golden hue over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The world seemed still, as if holding its breath. Inside the modest two-story house, everything appeared as it always had. A home built on the quiet rhythm of daily life. There was a certain comfort in the predictable hum of the dishwasher, the low murmur of the television in the background, and the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing from upstairs. For Thomas, this was his world, one he worked tirelessly to build, brick by brick. His wife, Claire, was the anchor of his life, the woman he trusted with his heart, and his daughter, Emily, was the light of his world. The three of them formed a perfect picture of family, a unit that nothing could tear apart, or so he thought. But beneath the surface, something was shifting, something Thomas couldn't yet see but would soon feel. Claire had become distant over the past few months, her smiles less frequent, her eyes lost in thought. Thomas had tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to the pressures of work, or perhaps the quiet toll of time. But the subtle cracks were there, even if they had gone unnoticed. One evening, as he sat in his favorite armchair, the feeling of unease gnawed at him. There was a strange tension in the air, as if the house itself was on edge. He had no proof, no clear sign of betrayal, only the instinct that something was wrong. It was a kind of feeling that sinks deep into the gut, a premonition that things, once perfect, are on the verge of breaking. Little did he know, his life was about to be shattered. The storm was coming, and it would come with a fury he could never have predicted. It started with a single phone call. Thomas had come home late from work that evening, his tired body aching for rest, his mind still tangled in the chaos of his day. As he kicked off his shoes and entered the living room, he noticed Claire's phone lying on the coffee table. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner, a ritual she'd done for years. It was a scene he'd grown accustomed to, a comforting normalcy that now felt strangely hollow. The phone screen was lit, and something caught his eye, a message from a name he didn't recognize. He could hear Claire's voice calling from the kitchen, her words light and airy, but the phone seemed to whisper louder. "I love you, Claire. I'll be waiting for you tonight." He froze. His pulse quickened, a coldness creeping up his spine. He had always trusted Claire implicitly. Their marriage was built on a foundation of honesty, love, and shared dreams. But now, staring at the message, doubt began to slither into his thoughts, a dark cloud slowly encroaching on the sunshine of their life. Who was this? He asked himself. His mind raced. Was it a friend, a colleague? But something about the message, something about the rawness in those words, felt too intimate, too secret. As the seconds ticked by, the weight of the phone in his hands fell heavier. He had always respected her privacy, never once considering the idea of snooping through her things. But tonight, the need to know, to understand, overcame him. He pressed the screen to unlock the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment he opened the message thread, his stomach twisted violently. There were dozens of messages, each one more incriminating than the last. Loving words, promises to meet, pictures that made his blood run cold. The sender's name, now fully visible, made Thomas's breath catch in his throat. Jason. Jason, a name that had never been spoken aloud in their home, at least not in any context that made sense. But as Thomas read, the dark reality began to sink in. This wasn't just an innocent affair of the heart. The texts were laced with lies, with a passion so raw it could not be denied. The walls that had once kept the truth at bay were crumbling, piece by piece, and the pain was sharp, so sharp that it felt as if the air itself had turned to glass, cutting him with every breath. His hands shook as he scrolled, searching for some sign that this was a mistake, some innocent explanation that could restore the world he had known. But then, there it was, a picture Claire half naked, her face glowing in a way that made his stomach churn. Jason had sent it, the caption underneath, "Can't wait for you to be mine again." A scream formed in his throat, but it stayed trapped, suffocating him. It felt as if the ground beneath him had suddenly fallen away. His life, the life he had known, the life he had fought for, was a lie. Before he could process what was happening, another message caught his eye. A final one. The words made his blood run cold, turning his heart into ice. "You know what happened last weekend. Don't let him find out. We'll figure out soon. What happened last weekend? The words echoed in his mind like a death sentence. He had no idea what they were referring to, but something darker than betrayal began to seep into his thoughts. His gut clenched, twisting with dread. He had always believed the worst of things happened to other people, that such horrors couldn't touch him. But now, standing there in the dim glow of the living room, the truth hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a broken promise. Something had been done to his daughter, his precious Emily. In that moment, everything went still. His world, once so carefully constructed, began to crumble around him. The comfortable hum of daily life became a distant, fading memory, drowned out by the terrifying realization that his daughter had been hurt and that the man who had caused her pain was closer than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just his wife who had betrayed him. It was everyone. The storm had arrived, and there would be no escaping it now. The discovery of Jason's name felt like a match being struck in the dark, a tiny spark that illuminated the vast, overwhelming darkness of Thomas's world. The fury inside him was a wild thing, thrashing against every shred of restraint, demanding action. He had no plan, no precise path to follow, but one thing was clear. He needed to find Jason, and when he did, there would be no mercy. The first step was to trace the man. The name Jason could have belonged to anyone, but the text had provided enough clues to point him in a direction. Thomas began with a search through Claire's contacts and recent call logs. He scrolled through them methodically, the faint glow of the phone screen his only companion in the dead silence of the house. Jason's number was there, under the innocuous title of work friend, a title that made Thomas's stomach turn. But that wasn't enough. He needed more. So he did what any desperate man in his shoes would do. He turned to the internet. Hours passed as he dug deeper, sifting through social media profiles, looking for connections, and following the faint trails left behind by the man who had crept into his life. Jason's name, paired with a few keywords, led Thomas to a series of photos, some innocent enough. Vacation snapshots, group shots at bars, but it was one particular photo that caused Thomas's blood to run cold. There in the background was Claire, laughing with a man Thomas had never seen. Jason. It was the first piece of tangible evidence that told him exactly who he was up against. The photo was tagged at a local bar, and that gave him a location. From there, the trail was clear. Jason had left a footprint, a trail of digital breadcrumbs that Thomas now followed like a hunter pursuing his prey. Days turned into nights, and the lines between day and night began to blur. Thomas hired a private investigator, someone he'd met years ago through a work contact. The investigator was a man with a quiet demeanor but sharp instincts, exactly what Thomas needed. Through his efforts, they discovered that Jason worked at a nearby tech company. A few more inquiries revealed a disturbing fact. Jason had been in and out of town frequently, often staying in motels, never in one place for long. But it wasn't just Jason's elusive lifestyle that bothered Thomas. It was the unsettling sense that Jason was always just out of reach, like a shadow that slipped through his fingers the moment he thought he had it cornered. Every lead Thomas followed brought him closer, but never close enough. The rage inside him was growing, stoking the fire of a mission that felt more like an obsession with each passing hour. His thoughts, once filled with doubt and confusion, were now clear. He would find Jason, and when he did, there would be no turning back. His hands, trembling slightly, gripped the steering wheel tighter. His mind flashed back to the photo of Jason's smiling face beside Claire. The smile he had once trusted, now twisted by betrayal. Soon, there would be no more guessing, no more wondering. The storm was coming, and Thomas would meet it head-on. The search for Jason had consumed Thomas. Every waking moment, every thought, was now fixed on one singular goal: retribution. The world outside, once familiar and comforting, no longer existed. In its place was an all-encompassing obsession. His work, his friends, his relationship with Emily, none of it mattered anymore. The quiet suburban life he had once cherished felt like a distant memory, swallowed by the relentless need to make Jason pay. But revenge was not a simple matter of confronting Jason and venting his fury. No, Thomas knew he needed to prepare. This would not be an impulsive act, a moment of uncontrolled rage. It had to be deliberate, calculated. He could feel the weight of it in his chest. Each breath heavy with the knowledge that once he took the step, there would be no going back. He started small, researching methods of self-defense, watching videos, reading articles. The idea of fighting physically repulsed him, but his mind had already shifted. He was no longer the man he once was. Every tactic he learned, every move he practiced, made him feel like he was shedding the old skin of his former life. He took long walks, practicing quick, calculated steps, building up his stamina, his control. His movements became more precise, as if he were already facing an opponent. His search for Jason had led him to a small town, an isolated corner of the city where Jason had recently stayed. It was a rundown motel on the edge of town, a place where people came to disappear or to hide. There, the plan began to take shape. Late one night, Thomas drove to the motel, not to confront Jason, but to study the location. The building stood like a forgotten relic, the flickering neon lights casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. He parked his car a few blocks away, watching the entrances, scanning for any signs of Jason. The place was quiet, too quiet, almost save for the hum of a far-off highway. He spent hours mapping out every possible angle, imagining how he might approach Jason if the moment came. He knew he'd have to be fast, decisive. No room for hesitation. He rehearsed in his mind the words he'd say when he finally came face to face with a man who had torn his family apart. Each visit to the motel fed the fire inside him, sharpening his focus. The plan took shape in the quiet solitude of the night, in the shadow of the motel's walls. He could almost taste the bitterness of his vengeance, each day feeling more like a countdown. Yet, deep down, a small, uncomfortable voice still lingered, whispering doubts into his thoughts. Was this truly justice? Or had he become something else? Something darker? But he shut it out. There was no turning back now. The man who once stood in the light of his family's love was gone. All that remained was the shadow of a father bent on vengeance. The motel was as empty and lifeless as it had seemed from a distance. The neon sign buzzed intermittently, casting an eerie glow across the cracked pavement. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest as he approached the building, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. He had waited so long for this moment. But now that he was here, the weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force. Jason's car was parked near the back, half hidden under the shadows of a decrepit awning. It was the only vehicle in the lot, and that gave Thomas a sick feeling in his gut. The moment of truth had arrived. He had followed every lead, studied every angle, and prepared for this with a cold precision. But as he walked toward the entrance, something stirred deep within him. A faint trace of doubt, a whisper in the back of his mind. What if you're wrong? What if this isn't the justice you think it is? He ignored it. He had no time for hesitation. He pushed open the heavy door, the stale air inside hitting him like a physical wall. His eyes immediately scanned the dimly lit room, searching for Jason. There, in the corner, sitting casually on a threadbare couch, was a man who had destroyed everything Thomas held dear. Jason looked up slowly, his eyes widening in recognition. His lips parted, but no words came out. For a moment, everything hung in the air, suspended by the tension between them. Thomas could see it now. The same arrogant, self-assured look in Jason's eyes that had once been hidden behind his wife's deceit. "You ruined my family," Thomas said, his voice low but unmistakably lethal. Jason didn't respond, but the way his gaze flickered to the door told Thomas everything he needed to know. He wasn't ready for this confrontation. He thought he could talk his way out, or perhaps run, but there would be no escape. The father's fury exploded. In an instant, he was on him, pinning Jason against the wall. Jason struggled, but Thomas's rage was all-consuming, drowning out every rational thought. In that moment, there was only justice, only retribution. The confrontation had been brutal, an explosion of anger, words, and violence. Thomas stood over Jason, breathing heavily, his knuckles raw and bloodied from the fight. Jason lay crumpled on the floor, barely conscious, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief. But even as Thomas stood there, still seething, something inside him had already begun to unravel. The satisfaction he had anticipated, the sense of justice, fell hollow. like a dark void swallowing him whole. He looked at Jason, the man who had destroyed his family, and the anger that had once burned so fiercely in his chest now seemed like an empty, fading flame. The raw, unrelenting drive for revenge that had propelled him for so long had burned itself out, leaving only a cold emptiness behind. He wasn't sure if the satisfaction of this moment was worth what he had become. Outside, the distant wail of the siren broke the silence. It was time to leave. Time to let Jason deal with the consequences of his actions, but also time for Thomas to face his own. As he walked away, the reality of what he'd done began to settle in. The world, it seemed, had become a little more broken, and so had he. Emily would never look at him the same way again. And Claire, could they ever heal from the damage he had caused? There was no easy answer, only the quiet aftermath of a storm and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Days passed in a blur, and yet Thomas felt no sense of peace. The house was eerily quiet, the emptiness hanging in the air like a thick fog. The aftermath of his actions had left him broken in ways he hadn't anticipated. What had once been his family, his wife, his daughter, was now a fragile shell, and he was no longer sure who he had become. Emily was distant. Her eyes, once filled with warmth when they looked at him, now seemed guarded, like she was watching him from behind a wall of quiet fear. Every time he tried to speak to her, to explain, to apologize, the words caught in his throat. The damage had been done. The trust between them, the bond they'd shared, felt irreparably cracked. Claire, too, had changed. She barely spoke to him anymore. Her gaze avoided his, and there was a coldness to her presence that Thomas couldn't ignore. The betrayal that had once been her burden now seemed to shift onto him, as if his vengeful act had taken something from her, too. The house, once full of laughter and love, now felt like a mausoleum. The walls that had once contained memories of warmth and comfort were now filled with silence. Heavy, oppressive silence. Thomas had gotten what he wanted. He had confronted Jason, made him pay for the pain he had caused. But it hadn't been enough. The fury that had driven him had consumed him whole, leaving only ashes in its wake. As he sat in the empty living room, the weight of it all pressed down on him. He had sought justice, but all he had found was a broken man. A man who, in the end, had lost everything in pursuit of something that could never be undone. The cost of fury was more than he could have ever imagined.